I think probably some of you know today's guests, Jen Keller, but for those of you who don't, or for those of you who may be watching this on our website, I want to just say a couple of things about Jen, who's been a science educator for more than 15 years. She currently teaches AP Environmental Science and Earth Science at Southampton High School. So just imagine how busy she is these days. With an academic background in marine science and decades of field work in the Long Island bioregion's ecosystems, Jen is currently a PhD student at Antioch University, where she's embarking on a project about the transformative and liberating potential of student-generated nature connection experiences. Jen integrates the historical, social, economic, and political environment in her classes with her students as they learn about how these topics integrate with the local natural environment and the interconnectedness of all systems that sustain life. Jen is at the end of a 4-year term as a New York State master teacher, working to develop teacher expertise in the areas of content, pedagogy, and student well-being. She also facilitates the Long Island Master Teacher Climate Change Professional Learning Team. She's passionate about empowering all of us, students, community members, through knowledge and support. She's also a mindfulness instructor. She needs this in order to just carry on her own life, I think. She also teaches permaculture, and she's a forest therapy guide. And at some point in the future, she'll be doing a guided forest therapy walk with all of us. Jen, I can't tell you how grateful we are to have you here, because we know you're really busy. Thank you. So we'll go ahead and get started.
Well, thank you also, because giving me an opportunity to share my passion with the community is I'm very grateful for that as well.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you. So we're a small group, but I am wondering what brought you here tonight, and if you can find the chat, which if you're on a computer, it's like in the center at the bottom. You can just click on that and just kind of type a few things about what brings you here tonight. And I have a story that I want to tell, but maybe I can kind of pull in whatever you're looking for into the story, if you have anything. And if not, maybe you're just like here to learn about regenerative agriculture and why we need it. All right, so with that, I think I will share my screen. And oops, I did not share my screen. Oh, okay, that's great. I would love to do more on that, actually. That's really more my thing, is the personal level. So let me share. I'm back to here. And
You want to chat? There's a way of doing it.
Yeah. So you know what? I'm sorry, I'm gonna have to go back. Having a little issue here. Try that again. And another person in the chat, concerned about the environment. Absolutely. And, you know, it's Barbara and Deb, you know, it's like concern about like all of the earth. And I'm so glad that you say that, because that's something I'm going to bring into the talk as well. So let me try this one more time.
That doesn't do it.
Are we good? Did I do it? Yes?
Yes.
Sweet, thank you. Thank you so much. I just need a little feedback there. Okay, yay. And I just need to minimize myself. I'm sorry, I'm sort of talking out loud as we go here. And you know, before I get started, I just want to acknowledge that the house that I'm Zooming from is on Shinnecock land, and to express my gratitude to the Shinnecock people for their caring stewardship of this land for millennia, and also to pay my respect to the Shinnecock elders, past, present, and future. So as always, I'm super excited to be here with you, and this is the third part of a 3-part series about ways that we can help the earth heal through how we relate to the land. So the first 2 talks were focused on our own yards, our own properties, and what's around our homes. So this last talk we'll be looking more about how our communities, society as a whole, our economic systems, how they all interact with the land on a larger scale. So in the last talks, it was like, you know, this is us, but now it's like blowing it out to a bigger picture. And the reason that this is so important is that we all have to eat. And, you know, of course, I can really only speak for myself, but I love to eat and I love good food. And Wendell Berry once said, eating is an agricultural act. So all of us are interacting with the land, with the earth, several times a day. And each time we eat, we're nourished by the food that is produced by an interaction of the earth and many people and systems. And so because there are so many interactions there, there are a lot of leverage points within that system that we can use to make our relationship with the lands and people so that they become healthier. So where are we going to go tonight? So first, I'm going to briefly talk about how industrial agriculture contributes to earth degradation. So sort of the historical story behind it a little bit. And then talk about why, if it's so harmful, why do we even practice industrial agriculture at all? Like, why do we do something that we know is so harmful? And then I'm going to switch to a more positive note, discussing a few types of regenerative agriculture, giving you a few examples, and how regenerative agriculture can contribute to a thriving planet. And so for those of us who will be watching the premiere of Kiss the Ground this week, this is like a little prelude to that movie. So first part, how does industrial agriculture contribute to earth degradation? All right, so by now, probably most of us on this call or watching this know that industrial agriculture adds a lot of heat trapping greenhouse gases to the atmosphere. And in total, that's about a quarter of the anthropogenic or human-made greenhouse gases. So carbon dioxide comes from the farm equipment, but it's also released from the soil. So when soil is repeatedly opened up by tilling, it releases all that ancient soil carbon into the atmosphere. Also, because industrial agriculture uses a lot of fossil fuel-based fertilizer, the soil then releases nitrous oxide, which is another potent greenhouse gas. Right? So that's a gas that doesn't get talked about a lot, but it gets released during agriculture as well. So that's the plant side. And a lot of those plants that are grown actually get fed to animals. And by now, a lot of us know the connection between industrial meat production and methane, where cows release methane in their belches. And of course, you have the piles of manure that also release methane. So industrial agriculture contributing to climate change. But like I said in the last two talks, I really want to emphasize that climate change is not the only major environmental issue that we're facing. All right, so climate change right now is getting all the press, but all of these are really important for us to keep in our awareness and to act on. And so agricultural practices have disrupted nutrient cycles, which is represented by the aerial of Lake Agawam showing an algal bloom. The bees in the lower left represent biodiversity loss, which is also reaching a critical point. And some are calling this time the sixth extinction in our planet's 4.5 billion year history. But this time, instead of an Earth-created or extraterrestrial disaster, this time the extinction is being caused by humans. So the reason that this matters is that biodiversity is nature's resilience, and we're eliminating this through agricultural and other practices. In the lower right, the picture represents environmental toxins like pesticides, and these toxins are harmful to all organisms, including humans, and the organisms in the soil that actually make new soil. So these four are sometimes called the big four. That's at least how I refer to them in my classroom. But really, I would like to frame it tonight as just one story. And all four of these environmental issues have at their root the same cause. All right, this cause is the severing of our connection with the living earth that we're a part of. And because of that, we don't recognize just how deeply unwell the earth is. So we've separated ourselves from the land, and we're no longer consciously connected to the very thing that gives us life. And before I go on, I just want to say, when I say we, I mean, I don't mean everybody. I mean like sort of Western, like the Western culture that I'm inhabiting and working within. So I don't want to speak for the whole world when I say we. So just as an analogy, going back to the idea if Earth were a person, because for a lot of us, we view the Earth as its own sentient being. And if we as people are doctors trying to make the Earth better, and we're saying, look, the Earth has a fever, let's bring it down. And that may be true, but really, what's the cause of that fever? If we don't treat the underlying illness, it'll just be a temporary solution for a deeper problem. So in this case, yes, the Earth has a fever, which is measured by global warming or climate change, but it's really caused by the organ failure of Earth's life support systems. All right, so because we've limited the capacity of Earth's forests and water and organisms and soil to respond to the disturbance and thus heal, the Earth is really in trouble. So it's our job to heal it. And by just focusing on one aspect, we're losing sight of the bigger picture. And tonight I'll talk about how continuing to farm the land in the industrial way will have devastating effects on our climate, on ecosystem health, and human health. So our community has been farmed in various ways for millennia. And like the rest of the US, the industrial agricultural revolution has had a massive effect on these lands. The transformation of the land from sustainable agriculture, which was set within the ecosystem, to extractive agriculture began about 350 years ago when the English came and took over the land long held by the Shinnecock and other groups. So unfortunately in Southampton, there are few diversified food farms anymore. And there are some farmers that practice more regenerative agricultural practices in our community, but most still practice a variation of harmful industrial agriculture. And this type of agriculture, it doesn't provide a lot of affordable food for many in our community. It pollutes our groundwaters and bays, and we need another way. So I just want to do a little compare and contrast between industrial agriculture and regenerative agriculture, because we really need to shift our agriculture from industrial to regenerative. So industrial agriculture, pictured over on the left, it's structured to support and make life easy for machines. So you have the soil being tilled, you have herbicides and pesticides used, and those kill the soil life. And it eliminates the soil's capacity to regenerate itself. The crops that are grown are monocrops, and in industrial agriculture, nature is the enemy, and it requires tremendous amounts of energy to push nature away and keep nature from destroying a crop. So this is really a brittle system. It requires tremendous amount of energy to maintain it. All right, in contrast, in regenerative agriculture, all the organisms on the farm work together with the farmer and with nature. And these systems are resilient, and they're resilient because they have many interconnections in the system because it's modeled using natural principles. So before, we get from here to there, I just want to take a little time to discuss how we even got to this industrial agriculture system. Why do we have this harmful and inefficient system? Oh, you know what? I forgot that I had included this. I also want to share with you that this industrial system is being applied all over the world. So these are pictures from the tropics. Well, the picture on the right is a picture of a palm oil plantation, which is palm oil monoculture. So the rainforest, the tropical rainforest, the most biodiverse ecosystem on Earth, was cut down to make way for a monoculture. And this has the same issues that I described above. So converting our food and other production systems to regenerative agriculture is critical on a global scale. It's not just important in Southampton, not just important in North America, it's important globally. And so what I'm going to talk about next, I'm going to go through pretty quickly, just kind of cover the surface, but hopefully it'll give you an idea of the challenges in shifting these critical systems and maybe give you an idea of why it's so tough to shift these systems, even though we know it has to happen. Okay, so if we know it's so harmful, why do we do it? All right, and the first reason is very important. All right, and it's it's important to recognize that hunger, undernutrition, malnutrition, these are terrible things that people have always tried to eliminate. And for many of us on this call or watching this video, we might not be that far removed from hunger, either in our own lives directly or a generation or two ago. So I always try to operate from the assumption that people generally start off trying to do the right thing. And I would even say the green revolution that happened after the Second World War can be thought of as starting with good intentions. Fertilizers and pesticides would increase yields and thus decrease hunger. Like, what's not to like about that? But partially people bought into it because they really do work, at least for a while. But these substances, they kill the soil organisms that help regenerate the soil. And once a farmer starts to use these chemicals, they become dependent on them, right? And an analogy is a person who takes steroids to get bigger and stronger. They do, in fact, get bigger and stronger. However, what happens is that person's body stops producing the hormones itself. So when the athlete stops taking the drugs, they're weak and they're sick. And it's the same for our soil. Farmers who've been farming in this way for decades, their soil is dead and it needs time to bring back its health. All right, so why do we do this? Coming back to the same question. All right, so they use this type of agriculture because this is what a farmer learned in agricultural school. And who's funding the research at these land grant institutions? Is it the USDA? I mean, it is at least partly, but mostly it's the agricultural, petrochemical, pharmaceutical, food industry. And many of these land grant university boards have agricultural industry executives on them. So farmers are trained by professors funded by the pesticide and fertilizer industry. And then they come back and promote those practices under the label best practices to their communities. And in New York, our land grant institution is Cornell. So that has the weight of an Ivy League name behind it. So farmers say they're using Cornell best practices. And this convinces a generally uninformed public and decision makers that this is in fact the best way of agriculture determined by the best scientists that Cornell can provide. So farmers in my town and elsewhere, they cultivate a perception that farmers, they're caretakers living off the land, not as technicians that are mining the soil. And in truth, that's how they see themselves, as that's what they know and that's what they're trained to do. So this really isn't to say it's about the farmer, it's really about the whole system. So it's really not about industry promoting these policies. Farmers promote these policies because also they're dependent on the chemicals because they, or maybe the farmer before them, have killed the soil's ability to regenerate itself. So in many ways, they're just doing what they can to keep things going because their soil is no longer alive. Another way that we got to industrial agriculture was the consolidation of farms and agricultural companies. So there are many fewer farms overall, and the farms are much, much bigger than they used to be. They average in the US about 4,000 acres in 2017, which, I mean, for those of us in Southampton, that's like a mind-blowing number. And once a farm's that size, efficiency for machinery is paramount. So monoculture really makes that easiest. And this increase in productivity means that each farmer feeds many more people than they used to. And this has had critical consequences for our nation because our nation measures how good we're doing by economic growth, right? And we measure our growth by GDP. And all our policies are structured to support the growth of GDP. So our nation, as a nation, our drive is to grow our economy. And once our economy became consumer spending driven after the Second World War, our agricultural system became a way to stimulate consumer spending. So instead of spending 25% of their income for food, now people spend a little over 10% on average. So by decreasing the amount of money consumers needed to spend on food, it increased the amount that they could spend on other things. So this would drive GDP up, which based on how we measure our success as a nation, that was a positive thing. So another political and economic driver of industrial agriculture was the ethanol mandate. So this was a law passed by the federal government in 2005, and that stipulated that a certain amount of ethanol had to be blended into the US gasoline supply. So we see that when we go to put gas in our cars, there's a sticker on the pump that says contains 10% ethanol. So that's a federal law that all gasoline contains ethanol. And as you can see in that graph, this led to a massive increase in the price of corn and the continued growth of feed corn monoculture in the Midwest. So this is shown on the map showing corn agriculture and ethanol plants. And notice how almost all of this is in the Mississippi River watershed, and the Mississippi River heads right towards the Gulf of Mexico. So the consequence of this policy is degraded soils, decreased biodiversity, and reduced water quality. And the water quality is so bad in the Gulf of Mexico that at the mouth of the Mississippi River, there's a dead zone the size of Connecticut. So our agricultural policy influences lands in the Midwest, but it has implications for waters in the Gulf of Mexico. So it's all interconnected. So one of the most powerful leverage points or places to change a system is to change the overall goals. So remember, the main goal of our nation is to grow the economy and increase the GDP. So what if we were to change the goals of our nation, where instead of having as our goal ever increasing GDP, having goals things like longevity, well-being, happiness, environmental quality, education. What if we measured our success that way instead of by increasing GDP? So having our goals aligned only with financial capital means that we forget two important things. Money's just a proxy for energy, and money's only one form of capital. All right, so money's a convenient way for us to move energy in our economy. All right, money's called currency as it's a flow. So we have our economy, and the word economy means care of our home, meaning our whole home. So we've been looking at the economy as if it's all about financial capital, but in reality, there are so many forms of capital and they're all interconnected. All right, and many of them, like, we don't really talk about them, and many of them are also starved because we've mostly been focusing on just a few forms of capital. However, they're all interconnected, and increasing the flows back and forth between them, that'll increase resiliency in our economy. We've put all our capital in one basket, and we can see how that's playing out right now. So expanding and interconnecting our economic ecosystem will create a more diverse and resilient web. All right, so this is just like if you think of our environment going from a monoculture to a polyculture, or the difference between monoculture, agriculture, and a resilient ecosystem, it's the same idea. So all these other forms of capital that are not measured but support a rich and resilient ecosystem for energy flow, they've been left behind by our obsession with GDP. So just as we created like a monoculture with our agricultural systems, we've done the same with our economic systems. And if we always measure our growth in financial terms, we're going to continue the current situation. Farms addicted to fossil fuel-based fertilizers, pesticides that poison and kill the soil, decreasing biodiversity and disrupting nutrient cycles. So this is a non-resilient system, and because money was always the goal, not nutrition, almost all our agricultural subsidies went to commodity crops, not fruits, not nuts, not vegetables, the nourishing things that keep us healthy. So what if instead our goal was increased well-being for all? What might our agricultural systems look like if our goals shifted? All right, so part 3. All right, they might look like this, like regenerative agriculture. So this is a type of regenerative agriculture. It sequesters carbon in the soil. It increases biodiversity. It produces nutritious food. And this is a photo from Paul Hawkins' book, Drawdown. And it shows a farm that produces nutritious food in a diverse and place and human scale system. All right, so it's not a huge farm. And because there's a diversity of crops, the farmer has flexibility and resilience based on weather and whatever the conditions bring. So I wonder, could we change our agricultural policies and subsidies, whether they're locally, nationally, state, to ensure that our agricultural policy is not undermining other goals related to biodiversity, water quality, or climate? Can we align our agricultural policy with all of our goals? And we could do that by modeling our agricultural systems off of natural processes. So if we go back to the model of succession that we talked about in the last 2 talks, we can think of this imperative of nature to change and adapt. So remember that with this model, early succession is over on the left, and the biome, or what in ecology is called the climax community, is on the right. So nature wants to move from the beginning, from that what's called the pioneer, over to the climax. And when we mow our lawns, we're forcing nature to stay in those early stages. We're not letting the land evolve into what it's meant to be. And this is the same for our industrial agriculture. We force the land to stay in this early phase and prevent it from evolving and adapting. So this is a picture of our biome, the temperate deciduous forest. So this is what much of Southampton land wants to be. So the question becomes, what is the best agricultural practice in this place? All right, what would be the best agricultural practice in the temperate deciduous forest? Or if we're in Brazil, what would be the best agricultural practice in this place? And when we operate from a place-based perspective, it becomes obvious that the type of farm that's best for Iowa is not the best for Long Island or Brazil or Ghana. All right, it's important to see what billions of years of evolution has created in a place and then humbly use that design to create a system that can produce food that's aligned with what thrives there. So as another example of regenerative agriculture, I'll share with you this practice called silvopasture. And what's great about a lot of regenerative practices like silvopasture is that they're what are called semi-self-organizing. And what that means is that these agricultural systems can evolve and change on their own. All right, and the reason is that it's modeled after an existing ecosystem. So ecosystems have the ability to change as conditions change. If we model our food producing systems after them, they'll also have the flexibility and resilience that we need in our changing world. All right, so for example, just sticking with this picture, in regions of the Midwest, there's a biome called oak savanna. So this is an ecosystem that consists of well-spaced trees, a grassy understory, and large ruminant herbivores. So that's just the biome that would naturally be there. So if we use this as a model for our farm, the farmer might place their cows or sheep or goats in a system that contains fruit or nut trees as the plant crop. So you can imagine this is an incredibly resilient system, both ecologically and economically. And using nature as a model means that our agricultural systems can run with few inputs, just like nature does. And right now, the USDA and some states, including New York State, are actively pursuing this with grants, although I was actually just looking this up. It's like less than 0.5% of the total agricultural budget. So it would be great if we increased the subsidies for this type of agriculture instead of the industrial monoculture. Okay, so how is this going to help? All right, so all of this is going to help if on different levels. I mean, the most deepest level would be changing the worldview of our community. But that's a really, really challenging leverage point. All right, really changing the worldview of our relationship with the land from extracted to interconnected and supported. All right, so that would really move the needle the most. But a lot of research has shown that changing worldviews is something that's very, very difficult, especially for those of us who are past adolescence. So what are other things that we can do, especially in today's political climate? And so maybe it's good enough to do things like increasing public funding to our land grant universities so that they're not as dependent on industry. Then a whole new generation of farmers might emerge practicing regenerative techniques. We could also financially support farmers to make that transition from fossil fuel-based agriculture. All right, their soil is dead and it's not going to support productive life until it's healed. So creating a subsidy to gap them through that transition. We can also invest in our social capital. We can create forums, interconnections between multiple stakeholders, build relationships between farmers and schools, farmers and senior nutrition centers, farmers and prisons, just making more interconnections to support our farmers and our communities and get more good food, local good food, where it needs to go. We can also work to change the perception that more is more and cheaper is better, which has been a driving force behind industrial agriculture. And of course, as Penny told you, I'm a teacher, and changing paradigms and worldviews can start in the classroom. And I really wanted to end on a positive note because I wanted to let you know just the amazing care and passion of young people to create positive change in the world. So also supporting and connecting our schools and teachers with new ideas. That's critical to having young people equipped to be the change that we need. And this is some of the work that my students have done in learning regenerative agriculture. And I also want to thank you all for coming and let you know that there are, I enclosed the references at the end because there have been many people who, whose shoulders I stand on who have inspired me, and maybe they will inspire you. So thank you all so much. And I am trying to stop my share. I wanted to stop so that there was time for everybody to get to the next drawdown thing after this. But are there any questions? I see. Gerald, are you raising your hand? Oh, let me, can you unmute yourself?
Unmute myself. Am I unmuted?
You are unmuted. That is correct.
I had a concept
Yes.
that I tried to do. I built a very large solar farm
Ooh,
in Brookhaven.
okay.
I found it very difficult to do it. It took 7 years, but it's built and it's operational. And the original concept was, for me, that I wanted to grow or farm under the panels.
Right,
So you don't waste that land.
right, right.
Okay?
Yep,
And I got tremendous resistance again
absolutely.
from Brookhaven. I did
Yeah.
have very much interest in, like, from Cornell,
Yep,
but
absolutely.
it didn't happen. I mean, it still could happen because
It could, because it's fundamentally like a great idea. Like, why would we not use the land for both purposes?
well, they are doing it out in California. They're doing it out in the West.
They're doing it in the West. They're doing it in Georgia
And
too.
in Italy. And
And even former President Jimmy Carter's farm
Okay.
has done that practice where they put the solar farms on the land.
But when you mention how the earth and how it's being used to capitalize and make money, it's very hard in this world to think of anything that's going to affect money adversely and then, happen.
Right.
And-
I agree with that.
Okay, so the farmers are the ones who you say are mass producing, right, to satisfy a need. Part of the need by the farmers is to earn money.
100%.
And here's a situation where they could do both and, in fact, prosper and help the environment.
I agree with you 100%. And it blows me away how much resistance, and I partially know the resistance in Southampton, and maybe you know the resistance in Brookhaven, because in Southampton, when they proposed that, the sustainability committee actually shot it down, which really blew me away, because to me, like you're saying, it's like a win-win for the farmer.
Yeah.
They're able to generate electricity, and they're also able to still produce some sort of crops.
Well, the negative is you have the utility,
Yes.
which has to take the energy and disperse it.
Right. And
They
it's like you become a power plant.
They are a very big obstacle.
Yeah.
They don't claim to be. Governor Cuomo has been very much, and has even stated recently, that he wanted 70% energy coming from renewable.
Yeah.
Doesn't stop, not, actually LIPA is the one, and PSE&G,
Yep.
to basically just not let that happen. The
I
bureaucratic process, it took me 7 years.
Wow.
It is, and it wasn't just them. It was the town,
Yep.
some of
The
the people,
neighbors,
some of the people in
neighbors.
the town,
Yeah.
like not in my backyard.
That was the same in Southampton. It's
Yet on my farm, okay, you cannot see my farm from any direction other than from a plane.
Mm-hmm.
I have hundreds of acres around me, so nothing is seen, nothing is heard, nothing smelled. So here's a situation where it's about 100 acres. So here's a situation where you could have a wonderful farm producing both electricity.
Or small multiple farms.
Right.
It could be farmed by small farmers.
Or, and I don't know anything about regenerative farms.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know if that would be able to be done under solar panels. Although they do make solar panels now that are clear.
And,
So the
and
sun-
even if we expand, I mean, I know in Southampton, when they talk about food agriculture, they tend to be focused on plants like chickens, goats. I mean, there are many things that animals are part of an ecosystem. And in many ways, having shade for animals just makes them healthier and more productive. And like a solar panel provides shade. Like why could, right? I mean,
I had the concept as
Mhm.
well, and it's being done in Europe,
Yep.
is sheep.
Yeah.
Sheep
Exactly.
don't jump on top of anything, so that's one of the main
Right,
things
right,
with
right.
animals
Right.
and the solar farm. But sheep graze, and that was also resistant.
Right.
But
And
that was,
also, then that keeps, you don't have to like maintain if you have grass or whatever growing underneath it. You don't have to
that's
care for it.
correct.
It's sort of a win-win situation. There's a lot of levels of resistance to that. And it sounds like in Brookhaven, the resistance was more to the farm. And in Southampton, the resistance was more to the solar panels. Like it's just.
I think in Brookhaven it was both.
It was both.
But it was well. I never brought up the second one until I did the first,
Yeah.
because I wouldn't get the first if I brought up both.
Yeah.
In any case, there's really no reason why that can't happen, and it should happen.
Yeah. I agree. But it's not. There's a lot of pieces in place that make it complicated.
It's something. It's interesting. Cuomo is 100% for it,
Yep.
right?
And in New York, they have subsidies for different types of. They're doing a lot of pilot studies on different types of regenerative practices. So especially they're really pushing silvopasture. Although I think that all that money went up to the Hudson Valley. None of it made it out to Long Island. And I'm looking at Deb. Pete Seeger believed educating children. Yeah, I agree. It's, that's really where, the biggest change is going to happen, because it really does take a shift in the way that we're thinking, because
but it takes a generation.
it takes a generation, and it's just so easy for myself to think like, oh, this is the way it always is. And I think of the pine barrens, and I don't know if any of you are hikers, if you ever get out, but just a few years ago, the pine barrens were filled with tons of pine trees. And as our winters have warmed, there's a beetle that started eating them. And it just like ripped through the Long Island pine barrens. And when you walk through them, like all the pine trees are dead. So it's like there's this huge transformation that's happening all over. I mean, so the pine barrens is one example. There's just so much happening in the world right now that it's a big time of change. There's no doubt about it. So, I guess the question is, do we cling to the past, or do we move
What's
forward
familiar,
into what? Yeah, you know, it is.
Well, there's,
You
when
know, it's so harmful. It's like people who stay in abusive relationships. It's like familiar, you know, even though it's so bad.
well, there's
So
a dichotomy between the two.
yeah,
There is protecting the earth and preserving the earth. Because protecting being what's here, preserving is to do things that are different to keep it alive.
yeah, that's very, very true. So it's like, do we want to sustain what we have, or do we want to heal it and make it better?
Yeah, well, that's
Yeah, well, I
kind
mean,
of.
I don't think we want to sustain what we have. That's why I'm not really crazy about that word sustainability anymore.
Well, I mean, that was kind of my fight
Yeah,
in Brookhaven,
yeah.
pure and simple.
So anyone else? Questions?
It makes me feel very good to hear that your students are so concerned and interested in environment, and probably many other social issues.
Yeah. And not only,
Next generation will be.
I'm so fortunate to work with young people and to also share that with other people who maybe don't have a lot of young people in their lives, because I hear a lot of like, oh my God, the young people, you know, all the TikTok and everything. I'm like, no, they care, and they're willing to engage in like challenging conversations that I would have never had as a young person. And they're willing to go out there and really make that difference. So, you know, that's also something that I love to share with people, that, you know, the next generation, like they're really willing to go out there and make the difference that the world needs. And, you know, I feel like we as adults need to get behind them because they're amazing.
Yeah, you're right.
Yeah, they really are. They're good-hearted people for the most part. Yeah.
Perfect. Do we have any more questions? All right, I guess we can leave it at that. Thank you so much, Jen. It was
It's really, really my pleasure. And
Thank you.
and thank you for letting me
so much.
share like my passion with you all. I really, really appreciate that. And
Thank you.